We'll give people another minute and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I think we'll get started now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Keys, and I'm the chair of the Canadian International Council Study Group on Intelligence and Security. And I'm delighted that that people are able to join us tonight, and others no doubt will join us in the next few minutes, but I think we'd like to get started. Before we begin this session, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, the traditional territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee Confederacy. May we honor the Indigenous stewards of this land and grow in right relationship with all Indigenous peoples. So I'd like to welcome you to this session. This session, I will point out, is being recorded, and we have a number of people who are unable to join us tonight. I don't know whether it's because it's American Thanksgiving and there's nothing but football on TV, but Jim, you are, I'm no doubt, going to provide a stimulating alternative to all the football games. I'd like to introduce Brigadier General retired Jim Cox, who is very experienced in the field of intelligence. Came to it the way a lot of us came into the intelligence world, through a backdoor way of not coming directly into intelligence, which is a little bit different today than in our day, Jim. Jim now teaches intelligence at Wilfrid Laurier University, and we're delighted to have him here tonight to be able to give us a presentation on what he's entitled Understanding the Canadian Intelligence Enterprise. And so Jim's going to speak for a bit, about 30 minutes or so. And I would ask the members who are attending to put your questions into the Q&A section, and then we'll get to them as soon as Jim has finished speaking. We've got lots of time, I hope. We'll keep going right through until 8 o'clock. And so, questions, all questions are welcome. So Jim, I turn the floor over to you, and see if you can share your screen with your presentation now.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll see what I can produce here. Does that show up well, the slide?
Unmute myself. I could actually, you could actually hear me. Good. Yes, it's fine.
Oh,
very good.
Okay. Well, and thank you again for the chance to talk about intelligence, which I always enjoy doing. I have a lot of slides here tonight, so I'm going to skip through a lot of them, but I'll start. I plan on giving you a general outline or a framework to understand how it works, or how it should work. The unfortunate point right now, though, I think is that I don't think we actually have a true intelligence enterprise in Canada, and I'll talk about that more as we are going on. Here's an outline of what I will talk about this evening. I plan to talk for about half an hour. I will start with a few general and theoretical ideas about intelligence. And this is the kind of material that is not or rarely spoken about in Canada today. And the absence of such a discussion is one of the reasons why I think intelligence is not as well understood as it ought to be. I'll go on and speak about the outline structure and strategic idea of the Canadian intelligence enterprise. And I'll be talking at the strategic level, although I'm quite happy to talk about the details of the tack to the question and answer period. And if we have time, I will say a few words about the new review and accountability regime, and then we'll have a lot of time, hopefully, for the question and answers and discussion. Recently, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency had published a review of the relationship between CSIS and the RCMP as it was related to a specific case. And these are the main points of that review. And the broad idea to draw from these points is that there still appears to be within the enterprise the need for more and closer collaboration and joining up of the various organizations. Now, we have a report from Greg Fife, who is one of Canada's leading intelligence practitioners and scholars. And it's a very interesting and useful report, and it makes two important points. The first point is that there is a need for a mature and informed discussion about intelligence in Canada. And again, here he makes the point that the Canadian intelligence effort needs to be more integrated. I agree wholeheartedly with these points, and I'll talk about them in what is coming. I want to start by saying intelligence is not a bad thing. And the people who work in intelligence are not out to take over your rights and your freedoms or destroy the fabric of Canadian society. In my view, the media and a good portion of the population just can't understand and don't want to understand what intelligence is really all about. I hope here to show you that intelligence is a good and natural thing for all of us. It certainly helps to preserve our security, and if we manage to do it well, it protects us from adversarial influence and all the horrible aspects of life. It allows us to carry out our lives as we are wanting to. And living in an intelligence environment makes you happy. So intelligence is a good thing. Now, a lot of the reason that intelligence is not understood as well as it could be is that intelligence itself usually has been studied and thought about within established ideas, concepts, and sciences, and each has a box, and intelligence has been talked about in that box. The analysis, in particular, is often improperly equated to intelligence, which it is not. Analysis is only a part of intelligence; it's one element. To truly understand intelligence, we should study intelligence on its own. And then after we understand intelligence itself, then it's appropriate to start talking about it and relating it to the other ideas and concepts and organizations that it is found in. So, there's a slide there we are. So we should start by asking ourselves, what is intelligence? And there probably are as many answers as there are people tuned in tonight. In fact, it's known that there are a variety of definitions of intelligence, and no one has been accepted as a universal. There are those who think there are a number of intelligences, and there are those who think there is one intelligence, but it is manifest in a variety of ways. I am a believer in that school where there is one intelligence that is manifest in many ways. So if we want to understand intelligence too, we could probably also ask the questions at the bottom of the slide. There is, what is special about intelligence that you won't find in any other of the functions we know of? And what is it exactly that makes intelligence intelligence? Well, in the field of psychology over time, they have come up with the idea that there are impulses in life. We all have the basic impulses of preservation, sustainment, and procreation. And intelligence allows us to adapt to the environment and get over or past or prevail over adversarial influences or obstacles on the way. So in terms of self-preservation, intelligence allows us, many of us, after a long and torturous route of agony and joy, we will eventually have found a mate. So if you put it all of the science together and all the fields or all the various perspectives of intelligence in a variety of fields, here is a definition of intelligence that is intended to be a universal definition that applies to all people and all organizations with a purposeful agenda. Now, all of the words there are loaded. It's a capacity. It's not any one thing. Intelligence is a capacity, so it's relative. You can have more of it or not as much, or good or better. It can be effective or not. It's reason, so it hints at cognitive activity and wisdom and judgment, imagination, and foresight also is cognitive activity. Actually, it's meta cognitive activity. It's looking into the future, and it's predicting probabilities. It enables. It's an enabler. It's a catalyst for action. It is not an executive action in itself. Advantage. Intelligence aims for advantage. It aims to prevail over adversarial influences and obstructions. And action. Here's the new idea. Intelligence involves an action module because intelligence is manifest in action. Here is a graphic called the intelligence cognitive hierarchy. It's a conceptual model showing that intelligence is the highest form of human cognition because it's going above and beyond what is to what will probably happen or be. The space between knowledge and understanding is intelligence, is the point, and intelligence is the point at which the cognitive activity involving the application of wisdom, judgment, imagination, and seasoning produces its magic and gets into intelligence. This is the ultimate form of analysis. Here's a practical example of intelligence in one activity, assessment of probabilities. Here's another one, and the weatherman is assessing the probabilities of what is coming in the morning so that you can act with advantage. Here's another sort of a practical twist on what intelligence is, showing its orientation to the future. It predicts probabilities, whereas evidence and knowledge is what is and is thousands of these examples. The questions on the left are not intelligence questions. They are more appropriately administered to an operational staff, whereas the ones on the right are well within the area of an intelligence staff. And these are the kinds of questions that intelligence staffs should handle. Now, here are just a couple of slides of the bullet points of the general idea or nature of intelligence itself. It's the fundamental form of intelligence. There's one that's the highest form of cognition. It's driven by intent or an objective of an executive authority. Intelligence has a point to it. If you didn't have a boss who wanted anything, you wouldn't have to have intelligence in that organization. Intelligence enables, it is not an executive function. Intelligence is not the same as the evidence. Evidence has to stand up in a court of law, and intelligence by its nature is predictive. Intelligence is not the same as research. Obviously, research is part of intelligence, but intelligence takes it further into what will probably be. Intelligence is not aiming to show you or describe all the possibilities, what might happen. It focuses on a prioritized and relevant range of assessed probabilities. Here's an important point. Intelligence itself is agnostic, benign, and amoral. Intelligence is not the problem. It's what the intelligence is used for that causes all the heartache. And the final point is the main idea of where I'm going here. The intelligence process we talk about in government, if we think about it, it really is only the human attempt to replicate the human intelligence function in a social organization or group. If you think about it, it's the brain who provides the reason, foresight, for advantage, and our senses are collecting all the information. So the idea is to understand the individual intelligence process and concept, and then you can understand and apply it with effect to enhancing and developing and designing intelligence processes in a social organization. And when I say social organization, I'm meaning a government, an army, a police force, or even the Rotary Club, any organization with a purposeful agenda. Now, this idea isn't new of taking what happens in the human to the group. As one example, the idea of the intelligence process or cycle was found in a pamphlet of the American Army in 1948. And you can see here the general idea of an executive authority giving a direction and the collection of information, the processing of information, and then its use. Today, the standard and traditional intelligence cycle is shown here on the right. And as you all know, it is everywhere. It is usually in all the training activities. It's clear, and it's used almost every intelligence course. The problem is it is outmoded, obsolete, and not at all reflective of what really happens in the modern intelligence process. It has been criticized for a long time by a variety of international scholars, but it still seems to hang on until now. Here is, only for information, is the intelligence enterprise model, which I've developed and about to have shown and published in an international journal. I won't go into detail, but I'll talk about a couple of highlights of the idea of this enterprise model. It is iterative, it's complex, it's not a tidy process at all. It privileges the human cognitive activity. All those ovals are what humans have to do and think about. So its main issue or main component is cognitive activity. And that places computers and technology in support of humans and not the other way around. It's got an executive authority at the front end and the back end. The executive authority, the commander, the boss, the CEO, the police chief is responsible for starting and expressing executive intent, which is what is driving the whole intelligence process. And they also have a responsibility at the end of the line to exploit what the intelligence staff has produced in order to actually have intelligence that is manifest in advantageous action. And intelligence is manifest only in action. The other point here too, intelligence is never over or finished because this whole model keeps on churning. It does not have any apparent end. Now, on to some more practical stuff. Here is to just kind of a general outline of the Canadian intelligence community, only to show you the general hierarchy. At the top, of course, is the Prime Minister, and then there's cabinet and committees. Interestingly, we don't have any yet. So this whole idea of the executive authority at the end that is responsible for the production of objectives that are driving the intelligence effort, we have an issue there. And then under the committees, of course, under cabinet, we have a variety of our departments. Here are the main ones involved in the intelligence exercise in government, and you all know these. I've got to tell you too that only because of space, I could include all of our departments of government and maybe all of the agencies on here, because every department and agency, even though it does not have a the PCO, the Privy Council Office, and it also has a role in the production of intelligence too, and I'll cover that in a moment. And then down here are the central agencies involved in intelligence in the government, and you have heard of many, if not all of these too. Here's another sort of a depiction of the same kind of detail. Again, here, I didn't have space to put all the departments and all the agencies on here, but the point of it all is that there are a lot. If you think of the intelligence process and activity in the government, every element in some way may have a role to play. The organizations shown in yellow are the ones that have intelligence specified in their in the legislation or in the document that established them. All of the others, intelligence is not a main role, but they all have an intelligence capability. And if they haven't got an wholesome intelligence capability, they for sure can be a source of information. Up here in the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command is not established in law. It's part of the forces, but it is a command, and it stands on a par with the Navy, Army, Air Force, and Special Operations Command. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. So the point here is that many departments have many agencies, and many of them play in the intelligence process. A lot more of them have a capability as a provider of information. At the heart of the intelligence organization in the government that you've all heard about, here are 4 whose mandates in law specify an intelligence role. And all the legislation and the mandates of organizations are available online. A department in the government is established through an act of parliament and legislation. Its mandates are there, available online. Each department of government also produces a departmental plan at the beginning of the fiscal year and a report at the end of the fiscal year. And if you read its legislation, its plan, and its report, those 3 sorts of documents, you will have all the information that you could ever hope for on how intelligence, which is only part of the mandates, is handled in each of the departments and agencies. So the people and organizations who complain about a shortage of information, I don't know that they have read all that is available in public. So in terms of security intelligence, that's tied to threats to Canada. And CSC, its intelligence And as you can imagine here, but particularly in these 2 areas in the bottom, smaller organizations, but these are the organizations who could call on a variety of agencies in the government for pieces of information. Now, if we had the time, and we haven't, but if we had the time, I'd take you through the detail of the 2018 annual report of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, because in chapters 2 and 3, they had the very first expose, or public expose of the process by which the government has sets and prioritizes its intelligence requirements. And here it is in general. It starts at the top by cabinet, who establishes the priorities. I should stop here and say, this is the process of the governments in the past. In the absence of the appointment of committees in Parliament today, the government today, we have not heard if this process is going to carry on. It might, but we haven't heard that it's going to be in place for sure. However, it'll be a general sort of equivalent of this. The cabinet establishes the priorities, and the government in the past decided to do it every a couple of years, and they will decide on the priorities on intelligence priorities, hand them off to the ministers and departments who have to go through an equivalent process within department to determine its own intelligence requirements and the priorities of those. Are reviewed at least every half year, and they may have to be reviewed in concert with other departments and agencies, because in achieving or in working the standing intelligence requirements in a department, it's those that are calling on the capabilities of CSIS and CSE and other agencies to acquire information for a department to meet its intelligence requirements. So you can see here, just at the start, every couple of years, they have the big ideas prioritized, and every half year in all the departments and agencies, there's another review. Obviously, there's a coordination issue that props up there. At the end of the day, as always in the government, it has to account for what it's doing or what it's not doing. So there is an annual expenditure reporting that's produced in the PCO, and this is the way the cabinet is keeping track of the implementation and success or not of the intelligence priorities and the standing intelligence requirements. Now, as I mentioned, there is a role of PCO to coordinate this, and out of all this stuff and pieces and PCO, there's a senior appointment here who is the National Security and Intelligence Advisor in the PCO, who is responsible for the coordination effort of the intelligence process in government. He oversees a couple of other organizations, the Security and Intelligence Secretariat here in yellow, and the Intelligence Assessments Secretariat in green. This is the operational arm of the intelligence organization of PCO, and this is the assessment arm. Now, the general flow again of the way the process works from the top down, we've spoken about. We have cabinet, who, if we had, as they had in the previous government, they had a committee on global affairs and public safety. And this is the one that had produced the priorities and the requirements. They also, in the face of a specific incident or a crisis, would form an incident response group. We have at present, they have formed an incident response group for all the flooding out in the West in BC. We have not heard what is going to be a committee who decides on intelligence priorities yet out of cabinet. Again, after they have finished their work in cabinet, it's passed to the ministers and departments, and a majority of departments have intelligence staffs. It surprises you who has them, and they will have their own work to do and generate intelligence requirements and priorities. To coordinate all that's going on in the departments and agencies, the PCO again has a series of committees on two streams. One on the stream of the security and intelligence policy stream, which is chaired at the highest level by the NSIA. and at the lower sort of levels at the level of the ADMs by the head of the SNI Secretariat. There is another stream in the to handle assessments. So they're again at the highest level. The committee is chaired by the NSIA and the members of departments and agencies around the table. And at the lower sort of level, the head of the IAS will chair meetings on particular issues. And if there are specific issues that need expert attack and analysis, there's always the ability to form smaller groups of experts from a variety of departments and agencies. So you can see in terms of executive authority, the cabinet has its role here, passes it on to departments or the ministers, and the PCO coordinates all that activity on a security and intelligence sort of policy stream and an assessment stream. On top of all that, of course, we have all of our international alliances and partnerships where we share intelligence, which has to be coordinated. Our top three, of course, are NATO, the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization, and NORAD, and the one you often hear about, but not much about, the Five Eyes, which is the strongest, closest, and the most powerful intelligence alliance in history. It really is strong. Canada that fall into that category are countries like Sweden or Japan. Thailand is another one. So the coordination of that also has to go on, and the main players there, of course, are DND, Foreign Affairs, and the PCO. Now, the question is, all these pieces, are they a community or are they an enterprise? A community is a variety of groups that have a similar interest. However, an enterprise is a group that is making a common effort. So when we are talking about a closer intelligence cooperation, more integration, that is leading up to the path of an enterprise. But as I said earlier, I don't think we are all the way yet to being an intelligence enterprise. If we had one, here's the way I would have described it. If we had a true intelligence enterprise that operated as a cohesive, efficient intelligence process and effort. Is it what we have now? Here's the model of an enterprise I showed earlier. Do we have all the pieces? If we had it, we would have all of these sorts of components in the system. We have the people, but there is no overarching professional development program for intelligence practitioners and managers and leaders in the government. There are courses in training in specific skills, but there's no overall professional education program about intelligence. But the purpose, we aren't sure of the purpose yet, because we haven't any sort a cabinet hasn't established itself yet in terms of committees. Organization, we have a lot of pieces, but they are not operating as one. We have a process, a general process, but it's not tight and it's not smooth. We have a variety of products depending on the issue. We have the governance in place, achieving advantageous action. It depends on what we want to do and the use of all elements of national power. And this is getting into the area of, have we got a strategic mindset that is able to take advantage of the intelligence we are capable of producing? And review and evaluation for the whole process, it's coming along. So here interestingly is what Greg Fife had called for in his report. He wants a permanent sort of committee of cabinet with the PM as chair, establish the position of the NSIA in legislation, allow CSIS to acquire all foreign intelligence as needed, and which we always hear many times, to make sure the power of our analytical cadre is at least equivalent to all of the information we are pulling in and are collecting. And the final point here I'll get to is we do have a new review and accountability framework in Canada that is catching up to that of our allies. It's still not as independent as it could be, but it's better than what we had. A point on oversight and review. Oversight is not the same as review. Oversight is a command responsibility, and the ministers and agency heads are the ones who do oversight. Review is independent and follows on after the fact. So we have independent after the fact reviewability. Responsibility and accountability, the ministers are responsible and they are accountable to the bodies that review their activities. The bodies who carry out the review now in place are these ones. You've heard the names. They're NCIC-Ottawa, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, mainly operate at the strategic policy kind of level. And CIRA, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, which is more into compliance. It has appointed experts on its staff, and it gets into the detail of law and legislation. And then we have the Intelligence Commissioner, who is often confused with an oversight role, but it is a review role. If you read the act, the word review is throughout all his responsibilities, but his main role is to pass a judgment on whether the orders and instructions and authorizations of the ministers are reasonable or not. And that's the word in the legislation, whether it's reasonable or not. If it is reasonable, he will approve the findings and conclusions and directions of the minister. And of course, as all other organizations, there are a number of other sorts of bodies of review that they are accountable to. Here is another, just a table of those three organizations with details. This is all in the legislation, so it's not classified or anything, so it's all available as you want to go and read it. All the people on NCIC-Ottawa are parliamentarians. The people on CIRA are experts, and the IC is a retired judge. And I'm at the end of my time. I've blasted on here. It's more than I intended. I'm sorry about that, but I'm very happy to spend any amount of time that you would like in questions or in responding to the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. If you could unshare your screen, I think, much as I like the comic at the end there, I think that's absolutely spot on for not
Do you
just
have
for
it now?
intelligence work, but for a lot of other things. So I invite the participants to submit your questions in the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And in the meantime, while people are getting warmed up and typing things out there, I've got a couple of questions that we can start off with. And I'm going to sort of work backwards through my points here, just simply because I can read my writing more recently than what I've written most recently. The whole question of info collection versus info analysis is often one of the biggest issues that any of us who either in any of those two categories or of the user of intelligence that we used to have to struggle with. There's far too much information out there, and this is where the analysis bit is so key to what we can do. So one of the points you made there was the lack of a professional intelligence analysis for training and so on. So what do you, when you're talking to your students and so on, what do you see as the important points that you give to people who want to have a career in intelligence of how they can prepare themselves for this sort of work?
Yeah, that I am keen, or my area I'm of expertise, or maybe isn't expertise, it's my interest is looking at intelligence as a whole, the whole process. Now, all the people who have been employed as analysts, intelligence analysts, are the best sort of organized sort of a component in the intelligence sort of in the process as a whole. They have an association. There are training courses on analysis. There aren't any equivalent sort of courses or associations for a collector, for a boss, you know, a presenter, which is becoming a skill in itself. So I start with looking at the process as a whole. And if you want to be in intelligence, you have to, I guess, in the first instance, sort of choose if sort of where you are going to be in the process. So analysis is one, it's a skill on its own, but there are other skills. If you're going into analysis, there's a whole pile of reading and literature on the kinds of analysis that you're able to do, from the top to bottom, the strategic analysis, the tactical analysis, or if you go from side to side, you can serve as an analyst, an expert in a region of the world, or a particular sort of conflict or technology. Or, I mean, there are areas to study to be an analyst. If you want to be a collector, you can be a collector who works on satellites. You can work on radios. You can work on computers. All of that are the components of intelligence. In my mind, if you want to be a leader in the intelligence world and be a manager of the process, I think that you have to have more than training. You need education on the process as a whole across the government. And it's that piece of education that is missing in Canada. It's in spades in the US. There are places in the US that are producing or have graduates at the master's level and the doctor level. It's growing in the UK. It's established in Australia. Canada has no intelligence education in the government. We have courses at Carleton in international affairs. We have a number of courses at the military college in Kingston. And that's it. There is no requirement for an intelligence sort of leader at the level of a DG or an ADM in Canada to have had any intelligence sort of training. And I say training on purpose because they haven't even attacked the idea of intelligence education. So if you turn it around. And can you imagine anybody who's an ADM in finance who does not have a degree in accounting? Can you imagine a chief sort of a medical officer for public health who is not a doctor? Well, in Canada, we have all kinds of people who are running intelligence who have no intelligence education.
Good point. A question coming in from a member of the audience here, that how could a more integrated intelligence enterprise improve Canada's response in concrete terms? For example, vis-a-vis the challenges such as China, climate change, or global health?
That is a great sort of question. And I say it's great because it allows me to say another of my favorite ideas. Half the problems of intelligence are not even in intelligence. A lot of the problems with intelligence lie in the area of, or the absence of, strategy and policy. So all of the elements of the question here about climate change and that, did I say what we need in the first instance, which is what intelligence is serving. Intelligence, as I say, is an enabler. It serves the operational process. So we need a boss, the cabinet, a committee of cabinet, to actually establish a strategy that has specific objectives that are defined objectives, so we can kind of measure if we are attaining them or not. It's in the attainment of those objectives that intelligence is coming into play. So until we have an executive authority of some sort who has established these measurable strategic objectives, intelligence really isn't able to do anything, and that there's no sort of reason for it to go and to reach out to other organizations. That's on the higher level. On more on the technical plane, we have, of course, as many will know across the government, a variety of means of talking and communication and processes and standing operating procedures. In the military, which is the best model of operations and intelligence as a model, everything is standard. Now that I understand and I recognize is hard to do in a government where where you have a department, each of which is predicated on a piece of legislation. And it's very hard, particularly in intelligence, to produce a technical ability to talk the same across all the boundaries of departments. That review that I spoke of in the presentation from INSERA, talking about the relationship of CSIS and the RCMP, I mean, that is the basic relationship that we have to have right if we're going to have an enterprise at all. If we aren't able to have CSIS and the RCMP tight and smooth without problem, it's going to be hard to achieve it with anybody else. So until we, and this is not through a lack of effort on the people who are doing all the work. In my mind, I think it's a lack of effort, a place higher up of some sort that won't allow or take the initiative to allow us to allow all the people who are working the problem to actually work across all the borders. It's almost the same as trade within our country. You know, we aren't able to trade openly and freely across the boundaries of the provinces. Well, it's the same idea, I think, that we are stuck in the government.
Well, there's a follow-on question here, which fits right into that. And I'm going to do the two questions we have here in reverse order. But for some high-profile current issues that are characterized as failures of intelligence, are we looking more at failures of political will?
The questions are great. I love this. That I am a member of the school that says very rarely is it a failure of intelligence. If you look at that, the model and the concept of the IEM, the enterprise model, it clearly shows and places the onus squarely on executive authorities. So intelligence is only able to go and address what the executive authority has pointed it towards, or told it to do, or given it a heads up, or even as mild as, gee, I wonder what is going to happen on Wednesday. Intelligence can say, right, I'll go have a look at that. If the boss, however the boss is conceived, has not expressed, again, a defined objective, or at least a general idea of an intent, intelligence hasn't anything that it's able to do or to work with. So anytime that you hear the argument about an intelligence failure, I just encourage everybody to say, okay, let's have a look at this and see what really had failed. The prime example that we all know, I think, I talk about the American invasion of Iraq. That was not an intelligence failure in the strategic sense. It may have been an intelligence failure in a technical sense. It didn't spot all the absence of the weapons of mass destruction, but there was a political agenda on top of that made everything happen as it did. Another example is the terrorist attack of 9/11. That was not a strategic intelligence failure. It may have been a tactical intelligence failure, because they were aware an attack was about to happen in some way at some place, but there was no intelligence ability to actually determine it was going to happen here and when.
Yes, very true. Another question here is that we see that a judge of a superior court, once retired, could integrate the intelligence commissioner. With this in mind, what are normal career paths for intelligence officers within the Canadian intelligence community? In other words, what personas are more prevalent?
Wow, that's hard to answer, because if you think of the way I'm talking, intelligence as the process, as the whole enterprise, there are all kinds of people in that enterprise, and many of them probably do not speak of themselves as being in intelligence. But for instance, the people in the space agency, the Canada Space Agency, if you ask any of them, are you engaged in intelligence? They would say, no way, I just don't do that. On the other hand, the Canada Space Agency has a great sort of important role to play in the acquisition of information and tracking of bodies in space, which can be used in the intelligence process and to be analyzed amongst other pieces of information. So in terms of the personas, there are probably as many personas in the intelligence enterprise in Canada as we have in Canada. I mean, all kinds of people. If you start to talk about organizations, then it becomes a bit clearer. Although people, and we probably are talking here that the ones that people are interested in is in CSE or CSIS. They have a specific role. They're on the front lines. They are doing all the kinds of intelligence activities of the collection and the operations that you hear about, although it's never the same as on television. It's never the same as in the movies, but it's important. And they do a lot of stuff that would be a surprise to the average sort of Canadian. These people are dedicated. They are fearless. It's the nature of the activity that you can't hear and you won't understand all they have to do, but they are operating on the front lines. and CIS in particular, sorry, not CIS, CSE in particular, I think is the furthest ahead of all the agencies in the government in making a connection with the public and private enterprise. So there's more of an outreach there, and I think you'll see more and understand more about them. And this is all online too, so it's not a secret. In the military, interestingly, and I still think this is a problem, if you're an intelligence officer in the military, you are capped at the rank of colonel. There are no generals who are of the intelligence sort of in the branch. I was an intelligence officer as a general. I'm an operator. I was raised in the infantry and brigades and divisions and that. And the principle there is that at the higher sort of ranks, the senior ranks, you have an operator who runs the intelligence staff, but all the people on the intelligence staff are intelligence experts and specialists. I think in the future, we have to find a way in the military to expand that to allow people in the military to achieve the rank of general in the intelligence specialty. And one way to achieve that is to, at a certain point, have maybe at the rank of colonel or major and higher, have all those intelligence people in the forces in a pool with all the other people, equivalents in CSIS and CSE for posting across the whole enterprise in government. So you could have a military person who spends a tour of duty in CSIS or who spends a tour of duty in the PCO, and the other way around. There is a portion of that now because a major element of military intelligence is civilian, but I think there's more room there to expand that idea among all of the others.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. And I think that's a good way to finish up this evening. We're over time, and which is always a good sign. But it's also a good segue to one of the sessions that we're planning to have come the spring, when one of the subjects that we were going to discuss is non-traditional or out of the normal thought intelligence career, in which departments have intelligence organizations. And you've mentioned the space agency specifically. In your presentation, you referred to IRCC and FinTrack. Somebody, a student looking at becoming an intelligence officer, wouldn't normally think of those departments and agencies. CSIS, D&D, and CSE are normally the ones that people talk about. CRA has a huge intelligence function. They don't talk about it, but that's par for the course. So I welcome everybody to keep that in mind when we'll be planning our spring session, winter and spring session in the coming weeks. That is one of the subjects we'll be looking at. We're looking at possibly also something on medical intelligence. And Jim, one of the questions referred to the challenges in global health and so on. So we will pick up on some of those subjects. And one of the other possible topics is the role of intelligence in outer space, or the role of outer space in intelligence, depending which way you want to look at it. So I want to thank everybody for participating this evening, and for those who submitted questions, thank you so much for being involved. And so please do join us. If you're not a member of the CIC, I encourage you to join. And I'm delighted to see that we have people at the session today out west as far as Vancouver. So Jim, your reputation precedes you, and thank you very much for your efforts on our behalf tonight, and I wish everybody a very pleasant evening. Thank you. Thank you. Special thank you to Lucas for organizing us and keeping us online from the technical point of view. So until next time for the study group, thank you very much for being with us.